What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex. In this video, I want to look back at Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. I know it's a new game, but obviously it's based off a pretty old game. I thought it actually would fit really well with this channel. I have completed it. I've really completed it for the first time, and I want to talk about it. I think this game is phenomenal, and I think the more I kind of read about it, and I read about, okay, well, is it taking actually the best of all of Ninja Gaiden 2, right? Because you already kind of have the PS3 port. You add some changes, and this one seemingly picks off things from kind of both versions, right? Tries to be the best of both worlds. Well, lucky for somebody like me who has never played this game before, period, this was a blank slate. This really was the time for them to introduce this to me and say, this is the definitive experience of Ninja Gaiden 2, okay? So as far as I knew, before I started to kind of read, okay, well, what are the differences between this and the original and even this and the port, I actually, I was like, okay, well, maybe now I actually have to play all three of them to really figure out which one I like the most. But I think this game is phenomenal. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I think this game visually looks outstanding. I cannot freaking wait for Ninja Gaiden 4, in the fall. But visually, it looks amazing, from the character models to the textures to the lighting. And then, I mean, as you can see from the title, it's really the gameplay. I mean, there's not too much to talk about, I would even say, with the story. I mean, I think it's just there to get you to place and, I kind of have you jumping around. It's fine. The voice acting is fine. I think some of the characters are a little bit stronger than others, but where this game shines more than anything else, and more than most games I think I've ever played, I really want to highlight that this is one of the most fluid, satisfying gameplay systems that I've ever seen, that I've ever played. And I actually have seen a little bit of talk online where it's like, yeah, it's funny that you have to go back to like the mid to late 2000s, and it's highly possible, and you can make a really good argument that in terms of gameplay systems, like, something like this, we kind of peaked there. I think I actually have like God of War 3 in terms of that hack and slash, and it still holds up miraculously well nowadays. You can even play the Dante's Infernos and Darksiders of the world. Those late 2000s, even 2010, 2011, 2012, they were really on fire with just kind of nailing these things. And I think this is the same. I don't know, in terms of this very fast style, and it's not the same as like the Black Myth Wukongs or Stellar Blades or some of the games we get now. Not saying those games are bad, because I actually really like those games too, but these games are different, right? It's not so much about parrying and having the perfect parry, perfect block, and things like that. It's about chaining attacks. It's about kind of picking which weapons you feel like works in what situations. It's about kind of positioning, right? It's actually about kind of working with the camera angle as well, because sometimes that gets in the way. This game just does it so freaking well, and it just has this pace to it. I think that's kind of the secret sauce of Ninja Gaiden 2 or Ninja Gaiden 2 Black. It has the ability to always kind of spice things up just a little bit, right? The way that they throw enemies at you, and even towards kind of the end of the game, almost recycling. Now, recycling, I think, gets in this game's way when it comes to boss fights. I think actually, one of the boss fights literally repeat, I think, 4 times in the game. And then there are some enemies that kind of keep coming back, but they have a pretty good system of even like kind of minor bosses being used over and over, as enemies, and kind of throwing these different variations, right? That's what a lot of these games back in the 2000s kind of had to do, right? Is introduce enemies and then find these creative ways of combinations, right? How many different combinations can we get and throwing these enemies to you? And that really promotes a lot of different things, right? Because it promotes strategy when you're fighting, I think, to the end of the game. And actually, the end of the game is where I struggled, I would say, the most, when you're fighting like spellcasters and they're pretty far away. Then you're also fighting those ninjas, and then you're also fighting those ninjas with like the claw hands, and each one of them kind of presents their own issues, but you kind of have to prioritize which one you're going to go after, right, versus another. So I think that's what you get. That's what happens when you throw 2, 3, 4 different enemy types at you, whereas previously maybe you only did 1 or 2. Now you have to really think. Now you have to kind of prioritize which ones you're going to take out first, which ones kind of have the most danger. That's the strategy element. And then in terms of that fluidity, I mean, that's something that this game just has down. From the second you start it, you realize, oh my dear God, again, the pacing of couple attacks, finisher. Couple attacks, finisher. And I know this goes into some of the changes, right? Because I think from what I've seen, it's not as spongy as the PS3 port, but it is more spongy, the enemies, than the original. I think I saw IGN's review where if you play this game on normal, and then if you play the original Ninja Gaiden 2 on hard, I mean, is it harder? Yes, but the enemies actually go down easier in the original game on hard than this game on normal. And that was something that made me think, ah, shoot, you know, maybe I need to try now, and I probably will at some point. I need to try the original Ninja Gaiden because this is what happens when you don't play the original and you really have no baseline. I actually feel it was pretty okay. Like, are some enemies spongy? Yeah, but I actually think the game does a good job with the dismemberment, which I knew about a little bit, but I didn't know it was this severe. And I say that in the best way possible. I don't say, oh, you know, I can't handle the gore and stuff. I mean, I don't love scary movies and stuff besides like Scream, but when it comes to violence, I can take it specifically in games. And holy dear God, I mean, those finishers, they never get old. And, you know, it's something that as you upgrade the weapons, you know, they just become cooler. They just become something where you're interested in those additional combos that you now have. But different finishers for different enemies, different finishers for different enemies with different weapons. It never gets old. And I think it's also because of that fast pace to just feel that this game has, that you're going through, you have a group of 6 or 7 enemies. You can do takedowns with, say, just the sword, just your base sword, which I think is actually my favorite weapon. You can do that, and you could see maybe the same animation every, you know, 5, 6, 7 times, and you'll still love it. Because it just has that feel to it where you feel like you're making progress, where you feel like a ninja, like you feel super, super cool. And I've never really felt that in almost any other game. Like, that's, again, a real big highlight. I want to say the combat is just so freaking fun. And, you know, there are some weapons any almost two-handed weapon I try to stay away from just because it didn't feel right. You know, it actually reminded me, there's one of them, kind of like 2 blade type things, that reminded me of Hades' weapon in God of War 3. And it's like, I like it to a degree. I just didn't feel like it ever fit with enemies. I freaking love the scythe. That was like a big one that I used. I love just the basic blade. I love the claws, and I think the lunar staff. That staff comes in clutch, especially with large enemies, large enemy groups towards the end. But I would say those were my primary 4. You know, you upgrade them, and it just feels so good every time you get that next upgrade, and you say, okay, well, what can I do with these weapons now? And again, I think the way that they filter enemies through just always makes it fun. The boss fights, they're also fun. I would say they're pretty hit or miss, though. That was something that, you know, I'm trying to just enjoy the ride, right? Like, I get it through Game Pass. I think that's a huge perk in this situation. And it's like, okay, I'm playing it for free. I'm playing what they call this definitive version. Never played it before. Let's just see how it's like. And I'm not really holding anything too much against it. But I will say some of these boss fights, the final boss fight, I don't know what they were thinking there. Maybe I handled it wrong. But and I think I did see this, though, in a couple of reviews. There are boss fights that kind of break the formula of the game. I mean, I like shooting things, okay? When I have that really big, like, cannon gun thing, I use that thing actually quite a bit. But, like, I mentioned so much about the positive of this game, and it's that just a quick sword-type gameplay, okay? Very sharp objects slicing through things, no matter which object it is, okay? But when you get to boss fights where it's just stay from a distance and shoot and then dodge, shoot and then dodge, and that final boss fight is literally just that. I mean, I guess there's 2 parts to it, and the second part, but the second part, it is just put to the side, like put on a cliff or like an edge. You just go up, you hit it a couple times, you dodge a couple strikes. You know, I just felt basically the pacing was a little off as well. I mean, the boss fights that focus more on distance did feel weaker, but then there'd be some boss fights that I would just like, it would be so easy. I would just go through it in a second. I would say, oh, I feel pretty good about myself. Then the next boss fight would have would give me a lot of trouble. Anything with kind of faster speed. Again, the camera kind of gets in the way. Sometimes his positioning, like if you want him to hit an enemy to the left, you have to be just angled just right? If you're not angled just right, he's not going to hit in that direction or exactly the enemy that you want him to. And I don't necessarily need a lock on or anything. I would just prefer it to be, I don't know, a little bit more responsive in that way. But there's some jank to it. There's a little bit of jank to a game that's actually pretty old, but I loved it. I freaking loved this game, and I just thought it was so much fun. You know, I think gameplay, I oftentimes actually talk about, you know, I like story. I like characters, and that can make up for gameplay in some games to me, okay? I think games can be lifted up by that. But ultimately, you are playing a video game, and most times gameplay is king. I don't know if all the time, but most times, and this is the prime example of it's a fine story. It's their fine characters. It is fun to play as the other three. I like the idea of those kind of breaks. I like the idea that they kind of specialize in their own. I got into all three of them. The slower the character, the less fun I had, in the experience. But I actually thought all three of them were really cool and nice breakups and kind of like missing plot moments, right? Because you're kind of facing, at least some of the bosses, you're kind of repeating the locations you're repeating. Some of them are like following you. Some of them are like right ahead of you. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. But this is an example where gameplay is king and it can kind of make up for anything else, right? Like the boss fights are overall pretty good. The camera angle gets in the way, but the gameplay shines, and the gameplay really can carry it through. Anything that I can talk about that's negative with this game, that's a little rough around the edges, when they specialize at one thing, my dear God, they nailed that one thing. I've never, again, to end this video, never really felt a game that made me feel so fluid and just so like visceral and just so satisfying. Like it never got old in that way. You would go to a new area and say, okay, I'm ready to dismember like 30 enemies and do it for 20 minutes, end the chapter, go to the next chapter. I could do that for hours, and actually it never got old. I could have kept going except for the game ended, so I think they freaking nailed it. However, that is coming from somebody that didn't play the original, so I can see from what other people say that this might not be the actual definitive version, and maybe the original was better, but I think for somebody just jumping in like me, I think this game was phenomenal and a really good starting point, at least for me. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.